Okay, thank you. So, morning everyone. Thank you for joining us for our 7th show and tell of our back office planning system beta phase. As with previous sessions, we have a link on the second slide for any questions, which we'll answer at the end, like last time. So, what have we been doing for the last? Nope. Why are we here? So, as I said before, we have been funded by MHCLG to work with partners to look at developing an alternative offering to local authorities for a back office planning system. But what we have been trying, or what we have been doing, is creating it as a user-centered product. So with users at the front and center of design and development. And now what we've been doing for the last 2 weeks. So again, we've been testing our prototypes, and it's important to do that because, as I said, it's a user-centered design approach. So we want to be able to understand what the needs of users are and be able to tailor our development based on feedback and those needs, or the needs of officers and managers. We've been focusing on building the document management functionality, so uploading plans and drawings and archiving superseded plans and drawings. We've been advancing the infrastructure, which Evangelos will talk about in a bit, but also smaller features such as reference numbers and content changes. I think now Michelle is going to take you through the research side.
Thanks, Jack. So this sprint, we had 5 user research and testing sessions with Greenwich, Southwark and Coventry Council. And we tested with both planning officers and planning managers. So with planning officers, we tested the kind of skeleton journey for assessing a application for full householder planning permission. And we got a lot of feedback on that, which we're going to talk about in the next few slides. But we also tested with managers, because sometimes the manager will receive a recommendation from an officer and they might not quite agree with that recommendation. So they may need to send that back to the officer for them to review it again. They might also want to provide a comment on why they're sending it back. And then the officer will receive that, will be able to review that feedback and make any changes and submit it to the manager again. So we tested that journey as well. Next slide, please.
Thanks, Michelle. So one of the first things we're going to talk about is the content design crit we had. So this was for permitted development. While testing, we noticed that they weren't able to find certain things easily, and that could have been because of the content specifically. And so we did a content design crit with members from our team as well as the Unboxed design team. And one of the things we specifically were trying to improve was the task list that planning officers and managers see. And right when we were testing it initially, it was kind of getting lost within the accordions and they weren't able to really find and navigate to these pages easily. And so we improved upon these, made them a lot shorter. And since then, when we were testing with managers in last week, we noticed that everyone was able to find things a bit quicker. And I think it's because of the content design updates that we did, which is really positive. Next slide, please.
The one thing that we've been focusing on in our testing and research of assessing full applications is what's needed for consultation. Unlike kind of simple householder permitted development where consultation isn't really such a requirement, it is needed for full applications. And there are 2 parts to it. So the first is how do councils actually contact people who need to be consulted? And we focused mainly on consultation with neighbours, but we know that other people are also contacted, such as statutory consultees as well. I think we have a good understanding now of the need. We just need to think about how we're going to provide a solution to meet that need. And the need really is, it needs to be very easy for an officer to be able to look at the applicant's property and identify all of the neighbouring properties around that need to be contacted for consultation. I think in an ideal kind of scenario, it would be a case of an officer being able to visually see that property, see the neighbours be around it, click on them, and then a letter is sent to them. However, behind the scenes, that's actually quite tricky. So there's the kind of user interface and design challenge of getting that right and making that easy. But then it's about how can we make sure that we're pulling through the right addresses for those properties. And address data is getting hold of address data is a bit of a minefield. We're looking at whether we could use each council's LLPG data for that. And one of the reasons it's challenging is because you might contact a neighbour for consultation, but the neighbour, so the property next door, might actually have several households in it if it's been split into 2 or 3 flats. And it's really important that every household receives that kind of letter or email and is given a chance to give feedback on a proposal. And what will typically happen is an officer will go out onto a site visit and they may notice that one of those neighbours hasn't been contacted. If that happens, then they will contact them, but they will also get 3 weeks. So everybody does. So the clock kind of restarts, which is why it's really important for consultation to kind of begin right at the start of the process, as soon as an application is validated. Otherwise, it could really draw things out. Another unknown is even if we send that kind of letter to neighbours, they then need to be able to actually look at the proposal, so the detail of the application and the drawings and plans, because otherwise it's hard for them to know what they can comment on. And typically this is done through the council's own planning register. Every council has to publish applications that come in. And because they do that anyway on the register, that's also where they will direct people to have a look at those plans and provide consultation feedback. So we're starting to think about, well, in that case, do we need to provide a planning register? We can probably create a proof of concept register quite quickly, but ideally we would test that with the users of registers. And in this case, it would be, I guess, neighbours, so the general public. And to date, because we're building a back office system, we focus most of our research and testing on planning staff in councils. So that's just something else we need to think about. Next slide, please. And then I guess the other side of it is, once feedback has come back through, how can we surface that in a way that's helpful for planning officers? So when they do their assessments, they need to be able to refer to feedback at different stages. So we've heard that it would be really useful at a glance for a planning officer to just get a high level kind of overview of what's happened in consultation. So it could be, for example, okay, consultation is finished, it received 10 comments, 5 of these were from the public, 3 were from statutory bodies who were consulted. And then they would also like to be able to filter and identify which consultation feedback was an objection. Because when people provide feedback, they can either raise an objection, be fairly neutral, but still might have something to say, or they can even provide a supporting statement. But for planning officers, the priority is kind of tackling and looking at those objections first. And as I said, there's different types of consultees. So when an officer is assessing an application, it will be really useful for them to be able to quickly identify, okay, which feedback is from the public and which is from a statutory consultee. And that might be, for example, a national body, such as the Environment Agency, depending on what the proposal is. But it could also be another team in the council, such as the transport team. And usually those types of consultees are providing very specific feedback based on their area of expertise. So an officer will typically be doing their assessment, and at one point where they might need to write about the impact on, I don't know, local traffic, for example, they need to be able to quickly find the feedback from the transport team. Next slide, please.
So for the full applications, one of the things we did was kind of, as Michelle said, test a skeleton version. So it was kind of like rough prototypes, thinking about these are the things we think is needed and then testing if that's appropriate. So for the site visit, we had one page which had a spot to write written notes and to upload photos. And overall, this was really well received. People said that accessing it on mobile or tablet would be perfect. And that's because they can't access their systems right now on their phone or mobile, and instead have to get back to the office, transfer it to their desktop in some way that's difficult, and then upload them to their systems. And so they liked this idea of being able to do it on the spot or when they're coming back to the office. And so we took that feedback, but now we're trying to just integrate it a bit better within the system we have. So with permitted development, we have a document management system, and it's important that all document management is done through that same design patterns. And so I separated out the site visit into 2 pages, one bit to write notes, and the other task to upload documents takes you through the document management system. And to do that, we've had to scale the DMS, the document management system. So the first step is choosing the document type to upload. So in this case, it's a site visit plan instead of proposal documents that we've seen before. Next slide, please. And so this also comes onto more work that needs to be done. So we know that people want to take photos and upload them on site. So often this will be on a mobile device. And so the initial prototype would look like this on mobile. And when they click choose file, it does bring up the native browser of take photo or video and being able to upload from the phone's photo library. This is on an iOS device. And so what we need to look at is do a technical spike to see if we can upload multiple photos and how do we configure that through the native browser. And then we'll need to test it on different devices, so ensuring that it works on whatever devices council and officers may have during that time. Next slide, please. One of the changes we did was on the application form. So as I said, we're trying to kind of scale from the PD applications. And in that system, we had pulled the data from RIPA and put it in like a view and assess the application form. But now, because we're doing full householder, I did something similar. I took the questions and answers from the PDF that Planning Portal has, and I put them on here to see how that would work. I knew it was a bit of like testing kind of a blue sky scenario, because taking and extracting that from a PDF would be challenging and maybe not possible. So, but we thought we'd test it anyway and see what people said. But my hypothesis was incorrect, that people would want to see this initially. And they said, well, usually I look at the plans and I look at all this other documentation. I'd only refer to the application if I had a question or if I was looking for something specific. And often they don't even give the materials in that application form. So in the next prototype, I've changed it so it's taking just that PDF and it's using it like we've done with the site location. So it's a similar pattern to that, and it's showing the PDF form instead. And this is better, that we're testing a more realistic version of what we might be able to get. But in parallel, we'll also try to do and think about what the optimal situation is past MVP as well. And next slide, please. Great, so now I'll hand it over to Evangelos.
Hello, everyone. Right now we're going to talk about the infrastructure update and changes. Next slide, please. So as we had to run a penetration test in our code base, we had to create another environment. And that's why we reiterate over our infrastructure and we improve it using Terraform. That means that now we have our infrastructure as code, which enable us to spin up more environment rapidly. This also means, in addition, we also bought domain BoPS.services in order to map our services. And right now we have 2 environments under this domain. We also did some other changes. such as enabling us continuous delivery in our project, which means that we automate our deployment process, and this leads to spend more time building features. Next slide, please. I will hand over to Neil.
Okay, so as in previous show and tells, I'm going to demo some of the features that we added to the service this sprint. As Evangelos pointed out, we bought the BoPS.services domain, and we're using the preview subdomain for this. So as Claudia mentioned towards the beginning of the presentation, we've made some content design changes. I won't point out all of those, but we've basically done, we've made quite a lot of the content more consistent. So for example, all of these task titles match the, all of the link texts match the title of each step, for instance. Another change we've made is to the application numbers within our system, or reference numbers. Previously, we were using a combination of letters and numbers, and I think there was perhaps a reference to the council in the letters, but now we've switched to a sort of a simpler format, which is, as you can see, just the 8-digit number. Other smaller scale changes we've made include the formatting of dates. So we've standardized on the standard UK date format. And probably the largest feature we've delivered this sprint from the development team is the ability to manage some documents. So here, just to step back for a moment, this is a pretty much new application. And as part of my assessment process, me being an officer in this case, I might want to go back to the applicant or their agent and ask them to resubmit a document based on something I've noticed about the original document, which isn't quite right, essentially. So we've added the ability to archive existing documents. So I'm going to take this floor plan and inspect it, and let's say for some reason, or based on the officer's speciality, they notice something that's not quite right, they can go in here and choose a predefined reason for why they want to archive the document. Maybe the design needs some additional work. I'll get a confirmation step. So let's say I've chosen the wrong reason and I realise, in fact, it's missing the scale bar. And we can confirm the archiving of that document. Now there's only 2 in the list instead of 3, and the document I archived is still present within the system. I can refer back to putting this list down here. And as you might expect, if you've seen the previous demos, another effect of that is that that document's been taken away from these kind of contextual accordion features. So I no longer have that archive document kind of as part of my assessment. Just one more thing to note with this is that once I've gone through my assessment and submitted this this application to a manager, I'm then prevented from archiving documents, and the reason for that is that we wanted to lock off or kind of lock the management of documents just within the assessment period. The next step for the document management is to actually upload the documents. And this will include the ability to add tags to documents to say, oh, this is a proposed floor plan, for instance, or an existing section. So that's when we'll populate this placeholder content that you can see here under the tags. Hand over to Jack now.
Hiya, thank you. Next fortnight, the next sprint of work. So we'll continue iterating and testing our prototype of the full planning process with more spikes. So that's just a concentrated period of research and investigation, primarily around the more technical feasibility to plan the full application functionality. So that includes things like, as Michelle touched on, how do we make it easy for officers to consult neighbouring properties, but also site visits. And I can see there are a few questions on site visits coming up. We'll continue that document management system that Neil covered, and begin building the functionality for a manager to send comments back to the case officer for further assessment. So just to make that dialogue easier. I think now that was it from the show and tell. Here's so everything we've been doing is on our website, which is bops.digital. So you can find all of this here and previous blog posts. But I think that's it from the show and tell. So
we've got a few questions. So if you just want to go to the next slide, so you've got a reminder if anybody else wants to post any questions. So I'll read them out. So the first one is from Layla in Croydon, who's asked, when you first go live, how will BoPS sit alongside other planning systems? Can I hand that one to you, Jack?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, this is a question that's been asked increasingly now. We're getting closer to being able to release the PD element of this work. I mean, there's no getting away from the fact that, yes, there will be an element of dual running systems. However, that's probably not a bad thing, because the idea of turning off the incumbent system on a Friday and turning something new on a Monday could be very chaotic. So there will be an element of dual running systems, but I think to mitigate this, and this is a conversation we're having with some of the councils we're first hoping to test this with. One of the ways we could mitigate that is if there was one officer maybe who was processing applications through BoPS, and all other applications that come in by other means can be processed in the current fashion or current method that local authorities use. And over time, it could be scaled. That's one idea we're looking at, or talking about other possibilities. But whatever we do, we will minimise as much as possible the impact on the wider team and departments within authorities.
Thanks, Jack. We have quite a few questions now. So the next one is more of a design question, I guess. So the question is from Chris in Coventry, who's asked, for the site visit forms, could they be constructed in a way that's based on kind of the proposal? So, for example, if there are works to a tree involved, then could there be a set of tree-related questions that an officer would look out for whilst on a site visit? Claudia, I don't know if you have any thoughts perhaps on that?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. We've talked to some people about how to formulate certain things and create templates based on what they'd be looking at. And I think that is a good direction to explore. I think from an MVP level, it's kind of like, from a minimal viable product level, like what's the easiest thing to do, and provides the functionality easier. So definitely open to looking at it, but we're not sure when we would make it that sophisticated yet.
We have another question as well, also about site visit forms, about could the site visit form start to automate the officer's appraisal of the proposal? I think that's something that we would perhaps also need to do more kind of exploration of. As Claudia just said, we want to start with something really simple, just so that we can, I guess, complete our minimal viable product, get it being used by officers, and then see how it's working in real life, and look at that feedback and then iterate and add more functionality later. But I think some of these points are really interesting, Chris, and I think actually it would be worth us perhaps having a chat about this with you afterwards, and maybe having a bit of a research session with you if you're up for that. We also had a comment from Paul Downey, who's happy to help with addresses. Thank you, Paul, we need your help, which is why you've got a lot of thumbs up there. And there was also a question from Layla, who's asked if BoPS will be integrated with the planning portal from day one, and if not, how will applications be received into BoPS? Jack, do you want to answer that one?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, at the moment we are, or to begin with, we were focusing on processing applications that come through the RIPA route, which is reducing invalid planning applications. Our partner project being run by Lambeth. However, obviously we are well aware that the vast majority of planning applications come into or go into councils via planning portals. So we've started having conversations with them, and we will continue to have those.
Thank you. And the last question, as far as I can see, is a question about when you archive a document, how does the applicant know that they need to revise it? Claudia, would you like to pick that one up, or shall I?
Sorry, I lost all my buttons. Can you repeat it? Sorry.
So when an officer archives a document, for example, when they say they want to archive it because the design needs to be revised, how does the applicant know that they need to provide a revised document?
Oh, right now we have it so it would be external to our system, like an email that is sent to the applicant or the agent. And then once you receive that document via email, then you upload it and archive it that way.
Yeah, and I think when we were doing some testing and research, some officers told us that it's just quicker to just get on the phone to the agent. So we didn't want to try and build, I guess, overbuild something with that functionality in there. But if we do need it in future, then maybe we'll add that in as well. I think, oh wait, there's one last question that snuck in. So could I ask how the completed and in progress labels have tested with users on the task list? And this is from Nick and Helen at the Planning Inspectorate. So this is kind of, yeah, the GovUK design pattern for a task list.
Right now, we haven't really done too many in progress tabs. I think it was just on this latest one when that was noticed. I don't know if anything was actually said about it yet. What do you think, Michelle?
No, it wasn't. But I think when we do more testing for full planning applications, it might become more of a thing, because sometimes we know that officers will maybe start assessing something, but then need to go back in and make changes, particularly after they might have got more consultation feedback or when they've been on a site visit. So, you know, a step might be marked as complete, but then they find some more information and go back in and need to change it. So I think that's something that, as we're testing full planning application assessments, we need to look out for and have a think about that. So I thought that was a good question. There's one more. I think I'm gonna suggest this is the last question, just because we're running out of time, but please continue posting them anyway, because we can always pick them up in the next show and tell. But the last question is, Okay, so what will the costs be for adopting BoPS and or RIPA for a council wanting to participate from day one?
And that question is to so yeah, I mean, this is being funded by, or both of these projects are being funded by MHCLG, and it is the clear intention that there is no cost to being, or cost is not a barrier to adopting either of these services. These are conversations we are having with MHCLG and partners as well. So as we have more of these conversations and it's firmed up, and there is a clear understanding of what, if any, costs there are, then we will publicise and share that. But as I say, the clear intention is that as these are publicly funded by MHCLG, cost will be, there won't be a cost barrier to adoption.
And I think that's it with all of our questions. So I guess we'll see you in 2 weeks' time.